So I am Sean Peacock. I am a PhD researcher at Newcastle University, and I work between the School of Computing and the School of Architecture, Planning and Landscape. And I research how children and young people can be more involved in making the places around them. The main methods that I use in my PhD research are action research, and I kind of straddle between action research and participatory action research. They sound very similar, but actually they're quite different. So sometimes referred to as participatory action research, is quite a, I'd say quite a strict method of ensuring that at every stage of the research process you are involving participants in the creation of the research questions, in the methods, in the delivery, and actually in writing up the outcomes and the findings as well. But with my research with children and young people, that isn't always possible. It's very much desirable. I'd love to be able to go back a couple of years later to the class that I worked with in a primary school, for example, but sometimes they've moved on. So I have kind of dialed it back a little bit and recognised some of the limitations in what I do and kind of being reflective about that. So I'd say my main method is a community-based action research. It takes a lot of the principles of participatory action research, and it basically looks at how your research can deliver action and make change in the community with them involved in the research process. So I'd say that some of the research approaches and philosophies that I'm kind of inspired by, critical theory is one. So I kind of understand that as taking a very explicit stance in research. Often we kind of talk about bias in research and not being biased and trying to be objective. But I would not only argue that that is not possible from a social standpoint. We all come in as researchers with our own points of view, with our own experience, as do the people that we involve in research. But I would also argue it's not desirable because actually ignoring quite a lot of experiences and things that are happening, you're trying to kind of almost neutralize them in a way. So in critical theory, I suppose I take the standpoint that children and young people are already and necessarily excluded in society. Another orientation I'm really inspired by is feminism. So recognising that there are 50% of the population that are systematically and systemically subjugated and have been through hundreds of years of oppression. And I think that when we look at children and young people, there's maybe some parallels we can draw between their subjugation and the subjugation of women, which really should be addressed. So again, it's coming in with those kind of standpoints of recognising that there are inequalities, there are inequities in society, and they should be addressed, and they should be addressed with methods that explicitly recognise that from the outset. The school strikers for the climate are very inspiring to me. I think there's obviously Greta Thunberg, who kind of helped launch the movement of young people every Friday striking in school for supporting recognition that there is a climate emergency that needs to be addressed. And it's kind of grown as a movement while I've been doing my PhD, and it's kind of given me that validation, but also that excitement that there are people out there that are actually doing this work that I'm theorizing about and thinking about, and kind of I can take a lot of inspiration from them in how we might be able to involve children and young people in society and consider their position in society very differently to how we do now. In terms of methods, I'd say the design community, for example, software designers would approach tackling problems, it would be maybe mapping the issues and the kind of user journeys, the people who are actually going to be using the tools that you're building, and also people who are thinking about how we can do things differently, thinking about it doesn't have to be this way, we can actually design something different that responds to the problems that you're telling us. So I'd say those are the two kind of big inspirations for me. I would have loved to have known that I could actually be quite flexible with methods. So during my undergraduate degree, this is probably the experience for most people who've done an undergraduate degree, you're taught one module in research methods and then you're done. The research methods are done, you've learned it. Obviously that's not the case, and we know that now as a kind of, and I know that now as a PhD researcher, you can't just condense it into one module or, you know, a couple of classes. But what we were really told in those kind of classes was that there are several different research methods you could use, and this is how to do them. But what we weren't really told, and what I wish I'd known a bit more, is that I could actually adapt those methods and draw on lots of different methods to form an approach. When you're out in the field doing research, particularly with children and young people, you can't always do everything that you planned. You have to adapt, you have to be responsive to what's happening in the context. But that doesn't undervalue your research. If anything, that strengthens your skills as a researcher to be able to be flexible and responsive to what's happening in the field. There's a book by Virginia Braun and Victoria Clark called Successful Qualitative Research. But this book, Successful Qualitative Research, is a really easy and accessible guide for anyone, whether they're a PhD researcher, whether they're an undergraduate student, to start thinking about methods and why methods are probably the most important part of a research design. So yeah, that would be the text I'd recommend, I think.